Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Ireland Crimes and Mysteries. I want to thank you for joining me today, and if you're a returning listener, I want to say a big thank you for your continued support. If this is your first time listening to my podcast, welcome. It's great to have you on board. So without further ado, let's get started on today's story. Ireland Crimes and Mysteries is presented by Go Loud, Ireland's leading audio publisher and the home of Irish podcasts. Find new episodes on the podcast first on the Go Loud app and on your favourite podcast platform. Picture a Saturday afternoon in the west of Donegal, late January 2005. It was the kind of day where the skies sit low over the Atlantic and the wind off the water gets into your bones. It's the sort of quiet afternoon where nothing much happens. Kevin Duffy is walking down the road from his mother's house. He's 18 years old. The night before was his birthday, and he's been trying to ring his older brother all morning. No answer on the mobile, no answer on the landline. His mother Kathleen has been trying too, again and again, getting nothing. So she asked Kevin to walk the 500 yards down to Shaun's bungalow, just to check in. He's probably fine. Kevin arrives at the house. He goes to the inner porch door, the door that Shaun, by habit, always kept locked. Always, without fail. And on this Saturday afternoon, it isn't locked, it's open. Kevin would later testify under oath at his brother's inquest. I knew straight away something was wrong because he always locked it. He steps inside. What he finds in that sitting room will stay with him for the rest of his life. His brother, 36 years old, a man built like a wall, more than capable of looking after himself, is lying face down on the sofa. There's blood on the walls, blood on the doors. The furniture has been torn apart, a coffee table smashed, and protruding from Shaun's right arm is an 18-inch arrow. Kevin reaches for a pulse. There isn't one. Shaun is cold. He's been dead for hours. Between approximately 2:45 in the morning and 3 o'clock that afternoon, Shaun Duffy's phone had received at least 60 unanswered calls. 60. And all in that time, while his mother rang, while his family rang, while the questions mounted, nobody heard a thing from inside that bungalow. This is the story of Shaun Duffy, a man who was many things to many people. An undertaker, a mechanic, a horse dealer, a bouncer, a brother, a son, a neighbour, a character known far beyond the quiet roads of West Donegal. A man who was brutally murdered in his own home on the 29th of January 2005 and whose killers, more than 20 years later, have never been brought to justice. I'm Nules and this is Ireland Crimes and Mysteries. To understand what happened on that January night, you first need to understand the man. And Shaun Duffy is not an easy man to put in a box. He was born into a large family, one of 8 children, raised by Kathleen and Liam Duffy in the Meenacross area of West Donegal. He was the second eldest. He had 5 brothers and 2 sisters. His first cousin was Father John Joe Duffy, a local priest. It was a close-knit, well-known family in a part of the world where everyone knows everyone and where family ties run deep. Shaun himself was hard to miss. Physically, he was an imposing figure, 6'4" and broadly built. His sister Karina described him in an interview with the Donegal Daily as a gentle giant. That phrase is worth sitting with for a moment because it captures something real about him. He was a big man and he knew how to handle himself. As Karina put it plainly, he never started any fights, but he was able to finish them. But alongside that physicality, there was a warmth to him, a sociability, a larger-than-life quality that drew people to him. He was a bachelor, living alone in a bungalow at Meenacross, just half a kilometre from his mother's house up the road. That closeness to the family mattered. He dropped in regularly. He was a presence. He was, by all accounts, the kind of person who made a room feel different when he was in it. In terms of work, Shaun defies any simple description. He was a qualified undertaker, a role that in rural Irish communities carries real weight, built on trust, discretion and a particular relationship with grief. You don't become a trusted undertaker in a small community by being careless with people. You earn it. and Shaun was a known and respected figure in that role. He was also a mechanic, someone who understood engines and vehicles and the practical world of how things worked. But beyond those two trades, he had a whole range of interests and activities that took him well beyond the roads of West Donegal. He was a horse dealer. He went to horse sales, a world of deals done on handshakes, of knowledge passed between people who've been at it for generations. Through those connections, he was known nationally. He'd been to Dublin. He was a recognisable face at horse fairs in a way that most people from a small townsland in West Donegal simply are not. He was involved in motor racing and motorsport. He dealt in furniture and antiques. He worked as a bouncer at local events, including the internationally known Mary from Dunloe Festival and the Meenacross show. Between the undertaking, the horses, the cars, the antiques, and the doors he minded at events, Shaun Duffy was everywhere and knew everyone. The official Garda appeal published in 2022 described him as well known both locally and throughout the country, including Dublin, due to his interests in horses and motorsports. That national footprint matters to this story, as we'll come to. The broadcaster Gay Byrne, who had a home in the Donegal area, knew Shaun personally. Think about that for a second. Gay Byrne, a man who spent decades at the centre of Irish national life, knew this man from West Donegal. That tells you something about the circles Shaun moved in and the impression he made on people. But Shaun's world was not without its complications. By the time of his murder, he had made some enemies. His mother Kathleen testified at the inquest that he did have a lot of enemies and lived in fear of what might happen to him. And that because of that fear, he always kept the doors and windows of his home locked, always, without exception. The unlocked porch door that Kevin found that Saturday afternoon was not a small detail. It was the detail that told the whole story before Kevin had even stepped inside the house. There were legal complications too. Shaun had already pleaded guilty to 2 charges of assault causing harm relating to an attack on a father and son at Meenmore in Dunloe. He was on bail at the time of his murder and was due back in court the following month. Gardaí were, according to reporting at the time, aware of this background and investigated whether these charges and the people connected to them had any relevance to what had happened to him. None of that tells you who killed Shaun Duffy, but it tells you that the man who drove home down that dark road at 2:30 in the morning was not a man without history. He was a man who had lived a full and complicated life in the space of 36 years. A man who was loved, well known and feared by some, and who, on some level, was aware of that fear and carried it around with him every day. His cousin, Father John Joe Duffy, would put it plainly at his funeral. Shaun was not just a son and a brother, he was a part of this community, and when he was taken, something of that community went with him. Friday, the 28th of January 2005. Earlier that day, Shaun had driven to Letterkenny, a fair distance from Meenacross, out the east of the county, accompanying a brother to collect furniture. After that, he made a few visits locally before returning home. It was an ordinary enough day. That evening, the focus shifted to the Strand View Bar, which was a pub about 3 to 4 miles outside Dunloe, perched near the Atlantic coast. It was a gathering for Kevin's 18th birthday, family and friends. A normal Friday night out. A few drinks, good company. By all accounts, Shaun was in great form that night. There was nothing unusual. There was no arguments, no confrontations, nothing that those present would later point to as a warning of what was to come. He was sociable, relaxed, celebrating his younger brother's birthday. When the evening wound down, the group didn't go straight home. They all went back to Kathleen Duffy's house in Meenacross, the family home just up the road. They had pizza, more time together, a nice, comfortable end to an evening. They all enjoyed the last few hours together as a family, not knowing it was going to be the last time they'd all be under the same roof together. At approximately 2:20 in the morning, Shaun left his mother's house. He drove the 500 yards, literally half a kilometre, down the road to his own bungalow. That short journey on the quiet road in the dark early hours of a January morning was the last time anyone who loved him would see him alive. What happened inside that bungalow in the hours that followed was, in the words of the coroner who would later preside over his inquest, cruel, calculated, cold and callous. According to the post-mortem carried out by Deputy State Pathologist Dr. Michael Curtis, Shaun suffered 4 stab wounds to the chest, neck and abdomen. 2 of those wounds caused serious injuries to 2 of the main vessels of the body in the chest. He sustained 9 separate blows to the head from a blunt instrument, and an arrow, fired from a crossbow, went straight through his right forearm. The formal cause of death was recorded as multiple stab wounds to the body and blunt force trauma to the head. There was no signs of a break-in anywhere in the bungalow. Yet when Kevin walked in that afternoon, the place had been ransacked, furniture tossed and turned, a coffee table destroyed, blood sprayed across the walls and doors. Garda established that there had been a violent and sustained struggle inside that room. Given the sheer scale of what was done to Shaun, the combination of weapons, the number of blows, the ferocity of it, investigators believed that whoever carried this out must have left covered in blood. Yet they left behind no recoverable forensic evidence that led to an identification or an arrest. And the weapons used, the knife or knives, the blunt instrument, the crossbow, have never been identified or recovered. There's one detail about the crossbow that became a point of friction between the family and investigators. At the 10th anniversary, Shaun's sister revealed publicly that Garda had told the family the crossbow belonged to Shaun himself and had been kept on his fireplace mantelpiece. His sister rejected that flatly. "I knew my brother Shaun," she told the Donegal Daily, "and he did not have a crossbow on his fireplace. He was vain and only had a mirror on it." That conflict between the official investigative position and the family's certain knowledge of their own brother has never been publicly resolved. The Donegal Democrat, reporting around the 7th anniversary, noted that Garda believed at that stage that 2 men had been lying in wait for Shaun when he arrived home. Wow, let that land for a minute, eh? 2 men, believed to have been inside or waiting at that bungalow at 2:30 in the morning, there specifically for Shaun Duffy. Based on the evidence, investigators believe Shaun had no idea anyone was in the house when he got home. His family said that had he suspected anything, had there been any indication, he would have turned around and left. He was not a man who would have walked into a situation he couldn't handle, and yet he walked through that door. After approximately 2:45 in the morning, his phone began to ring and ring and ring. His phone rang unanswered for 12 hours. Nobody came. Kevin found him at 2:25 on Saturday afternoon, the 29th of January. Kevin Duffy's inquest testimony gives us the most detailed account of what was found. He arrived, noticed the unlocked porch door, stepped inside and found his brother lying face down on the sofa. There was a large gash on his head. The arrow was in his arm and he felt for a pulse. There was none. Shaun was cold, he told the inquest. "I knew straight away he was dead." Kevin, who had just celebrated his birthday the night before, was now standing in his brother's destroyed sitting room on that quiet Saturday afternoon with his phone in his hand. He called the emergency services. Garda arrived at the bungalow in Meenacross, and within hours a major investigation had been launched, one that would eventually grow into one of the most substantial murder inquiries ever mounted in West Donegal. Approximately 40 detectives and uniformed officers mobilised in the area under the command of Chief Superintendent Noel White. House-to-house inquiries were carried out across Meenacross and the wider local area. The surrounding countryside was searched for evidence and for the weapons used in the attack. Dozens of samples of blood-splattered wallpaper were taken from inside the bungalow in a bid to establish whether any of the blood came from the perpetrators. In the days immediately following the murder, Garda also examined a car found abandoned on a roadside near Gweedore, approximately 10 miles from the murder scene. The vehicle, an Opel, had been there since the early hours of the Saturday morning and only came to Garda attention several days later. Whether it had any connection to the murder has never been publicly established. Investigators appealed publicly for anyone who had been in or around the Strandview bar on that Friday night. or who had seen Shaun at any point that evening, or in the early hours of the following morning, to come forward. They were trying to piece together who had known Shaun would be on the road at that hour. Think about what that means. For someone to have been waiting inside or at that bungalow at 2:30 in the morning, they would have had to know or been able to predict that Shaun would have been coming home around that time. The birthday gathering, the route, the hour, someone knew where he was going to be. The scale of what followed over the subsequent 2 decades is worth spelling out clearly. As of the 17th anniversary appeal in January 2022, Garda Síochána confirmed that the investigation had generated over 1,550 individual inquiries, that statements had been recorded from over 600 people, and that more than 1,430 separate lines of inquiry had been pursued. A formal peer review of the entire investigation was conducted in 2017 and 2018. Those are not small numbers. That is a major, sustained, expensive investigation. At multiple anniversary appeals on the 11th, the 14th, the 17th, the 20th and the 21st anniversaries, Gardaí have stated publicly that they believe a number of people have yet to come forward who have information that could assist with the investigation. In their own words, at the 21st anniversary appeal in January 2026, Superintendent David Kelly said, "The investigation team at Milford Garda Station would like to thank those who have offered valuable information or assistance to the investigation to date. They continue to appeal for information and believe that a number of people have yet to come forward who may now be in a position to assist in bringing those responsible to justice." In July 2016, the Donegal Daily reported what was described at the time as a significant development: that new witnesses had come forward following the 11th anniversary appeal, generating several new lines of inquiry, and that a number of people had been interviewed as a result, but no arrests followed. In January 2022, Gardaí published a detailed formal appeal through the Crime Call programme and through the Garda website, setting out the full facts of the case. They confirmed the investigation statistics, confirmed the peer review, and again appealed directly to people in the community with information to come forward. They noted specifically that allegiances and relationships may have changed over the 17 years since the murder. A carefully chosen phrase that tells its own story about the nature of what they believe they are dealing with. The inquest into Shaun's death opened in Letterkenny in September 2010, more than 5 years after his murder, before Coroner John Cannon and an 8-person jury. Kevin gave the evidence about finding his body. Kathleen gave evidence about her son's life and her fears for him. Deputy State Pathologist Dr. Michael Curtis gave detailed medical testimony about the wounds. Coroner Cannon addressed the jury directly, describing the killing as the perpetuation of a cruel, calculated, cold, callous death of a human being. The jury returned a verdict of unlawful killing. No person has ever been arrested, charged, tried, convicted or sentenced for the murder of Shaun Duffy. 21 years and not a single arrest. Over 21 years, a number of theories about motive have circulated. Some in the public domain through reputable reporting, some spoken of in the community in hushed tones that never made it into the print. Let me walk you through what the verified public record actually contains and be clear where the evidence ends and where theories begin. The first and perhaps simplest thread is money. Kevin Duffy testified at the inquest that in the weeks before his death, Shaun had made approximately €20,000 from business transactions and had been openly displaying €500 notes in the local area. Kevin estimated that approximately €10,000 of that money may still have been in the house at the time of his death. Whether robbery was the primary motive or whether the ransacking was done to stage the scene or locate something specific has never been publicly established. What his sworn inquest record is that a large amount of cash was in Shaun's possession in the weeks before he died, and that the house was torn apart the night he was killed. Gardaí never publicly closed off the money theory and never publicly confirmed it either. It remains part of the open record of what was known about Shaun's circumstances. Shaun's own mother testified under oath that he had many enemies and that he knew it. He was a man who locked every door and window of his house, not out of habit, but out of genuine fear for his own safety. His family knew this. It was a fact of his daily life. At the time of his death, he was on bail, having pleaded guilty to the charges of assault causing harm relating to the attack on that father and son in Donegal. He was due back in court the following month. Garda investigated whether the people connected to those charges had any bearings on what happened to him. They have never publicly stated that they did. What those charges tell us, and what his mother's testimony confirms, is that Shaun Duffy was a man who operated in a world with friction in it. He had a history with people, he had enemies, and he knew, in the way that some people just know, that his safety was not something that he took for granted. Shaun's sister has been the most publicly vocal member of the family across the years, and she has been entirely consistent in what she believes. In an interview with the Irish Mirror, Karina says, Shaun knew something about somebody, and that person or persons didn't want the information made public. We are certain of that. The Irish Mirror's reporting, which drew on information provided by Karina, referred to Shaun having knowledge of a criminal gang involved in a cross-border car scam and suggested he may have been about to take what he knew to the Gardaí when he was silenced. This is what the family believe happened. It has not been proven. Gardaí have never publicly confirmed it as an established line of inquiry. Karina has also been specific about the mechanics of the attack itself. She believes at least 3 people were involved. She believes the crossbow was used first, specifically because Shaun was such a physically powerful man that subduing him with the crossbow bolt to his arm was the only way to bring him down quickly enough for the rest of what followed. She is certain the crossbow was brought to the house by the killers, not kept there by Shaun. And she has always been clear that Shaun had no idea anyone was waiting for him, because if he had, he simply would not have gone in. That image of a man stepping through his front door into a trap that has been laid and waiting is one the family has had to carry for 21 years. In February 2022, the Sunday Times newspaper published a report which, according to subsequent coverage in both the Donegal Daily and Donegal Live on the 20th of February, stated that detectives investigating the Shaun Duffy murder were, at the time, examining a theory involving possible Garda involvement in his death. I'm not telling you that the Gardaí were involved in the murder of Shaun Duffy. I'm not in a position to make that claim, and I am not making it. What I'm telling you is this. In February 2022, the Sunday Times published a report that raised this as a theory under active investigation. The Donegal Daily and Donegal Live both reported on that Sunday Times piece. Those are facts. What the Sunday Times reported is a matter of public record. What is not a matter of public record is whether those allegations are true. According to the Donegal Daily's account of the Sunday Times report, the theory centred on the disappearance of another man from the Donegal area. His name was James Kern. He was 64 years old, a single man, and he was last seen collecting his pension in Donegal on the 16th of July 2003. James Kern has never been found. What happened to him has never been officially established. The theory, as reported by those newspapers, ran as follows. It was alleged in the Sunday Times that a vehicle associated with members of An Garda Síochána was involved in an incident that caused the death of James Kern. It was further alleged that Shaun Duffy, in his capacity as a mechanic, was asked to repair that vehicle, and that in doing so, he became aware of what had happened. The theory, as reported, held that Shaun subsequently attempted to use that knowledge and that this situation ultimately led to his murder. An Garda Síochána, in response to the Sunday Times report, issued a statement which the Donegal Daily reported as indicating the force does not engage with rumour or speculation. That is what was reported as their response. No individual Garda officer named in any connection with this reporting has been arrested or charged with any offence. No court has made any findings. These are reported allegations, nothing more. The Donegal Daily's account of the Sunday Times report also included one further detail. A detail that does not appear in Donegal Live's version of the same story, which I want to flag to you very clearly as single source reporting. According to the Donegal Daily's account of the Sunday Times investigation, witnesses reportedly told investigators that in the hours before his body was found, Shaun Duffy was heard shouting the words, "They are going to kill me." Now, I want you to hear all the layers of attribution stacked on top of that claim. The Donegal Daily, reporting on what the Sunday Times reported, says that witnesses allegedly told investigators those words were spoken. I am not in a position to verify it. I include it because it is in the public domain, because it forms part of the publicly reported record of what investigators were allegedly told, and because if it is true, it is the most devastating detail in this entire case. It would mean someone heard Shaun Duffy call out a warning in the early hours of that January morning, and for whatever reason, fear, confusion, disbelief, or something else, the alarm was not raised in time. But I will not dress that detail up as established fact, because it is not. The same body of the Sunday Times reporting also alleged, according to the Donegal Daily's account, that investigators had established Shaun was involved in organised crime and money laundering, and that two individuals described as having Republican paramilitary connections had visited his home in the weeks before his death. Again, these are unproven allegations reported by the newspaper. They have not been confirmed by Garda. They have not been tested in any court. They have not been corroborated in any independent source in the public domain. The Donegal Daily also reported that GSOC, the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission, was made aware of the allegations contained in the Sunday Times report. No public reporting on any outcome of any GSOC process related to this case has ever appeared. What I can tell you is this. In January 2025 and again in January 2026, 3 or 4 years after the Sunday Times published those allegations, Gardaí at Milford Garda station were still issuing anniversary appeals asking members of the public to come forward with information, still saying the case is a priority. The investigation continues. Nobody has been charged. Shaun Duffy was buried on the 3rd of February 2005, following his funeral mass at St. Patrick's Church in Meenacross. Hundreds of people came to say goodbye. His cousin, Father John Joe Duffy, was the chief celebrant. Father Duffy's homily that day became widely reported because he did something that not every priest would do. He addressed the killers directly. Standing in that church, in front of Shaun's mother and father and brothers and sisters and the wider community of Meenacross, he said, "Not only have you murdered Shaun Duffy, you've also done it to his family, his neighbours and this community. Life comes from God and nobody has the right to end another's life. You will never be able to live with the crime you have committed. Every day it will eat you up more and more. The only way to free your conscience is to hand yourself over to the Gardaí." Those words, spoken at a funeral, in a church, in front of a community that was in shock, landed in a particular way. Because Father Duffy wasn't speaking to an unknown abstraction. He was speaking, in the implicit understanding of everyone in that church, to people who were possibly there, possibly in that community, possibly people some of them knew. The funeral cortege passed the Strand View Bar, the pub where Shaun had been celebrating his brother's birthday less than 48 hours earlier. He was buried in the local cemetery about 2 miles from the church. The impact on the community was enormous. Elderly people living alone who felt particularly unsettled. They were checking their locks, afraid to answer the door. Fear had settled on the area in a way that West Donegal had not been accustomed to. The sense of safety that a quite rural community had always taken for granted had been shattered overnight. In the immediate weeks after the murder, that fear was palpable. People who lived alone checked their locks. The community of Meenacross is small and remote. A place where you know everyone and everyone knows you. The idea that a man could be killed with that level of ferocity in his own home by people who arrived armed and prepared, and that those people could then disappear into the night without trace, that really shook people in a way that will take a long time to get over. And yet, 21 years on, the locals in Meenacross today rarely speak of the killing at all, not even privately. A silence has settled over it. Now that can mean many things: grief, helplessness, acceptance, or perhaps something else entirely. Gardaí have consistently said they believe people with information have not yet come forward, that silence and that belief sit very uneasily beside each other. Shaun's sister Karina has been the exception. She has spoken publicly and repeatedly at every significant anniversary, refusing to let her brother's case fade. At the 7th anniversary in 2012, she spoke to the Donegal Democrat and said, "We've heard nothing since the inquest. We're fed up that they haven't got anywhere, but I don't think they ever will, to be honest. And I thought that from day one. There has to be someone locally who knows something. And it wasn't one person who was responsible for it. It had to be more. Shaun was more than able to look after himself." She called at that point for the case to be handed to the cold case squad. They should pass it on to the expert cold case Gardaí who can find who killed him, she said. By 2015, at the 10th anniversary, she was still pushing. Donegal Gardaí can do no more. New guards must come in to solve Shaun's murder. Nothing has happened in the case for ages. The Gardaí have told us nothing new at all. It's the same old story. At that point, she also revisited the crossbow detail. That Gardaí had told the family it belonged to Shaun and was kept on his mantelpiece, and her flat rejection of it. "I knew my brother Shaun and he did not have a crossbow on his fireplace." That small detail, a mirror instead of a crossbow, tells you something about Karina's relationship with her brother. She knew him. She knew what he was like. She knew what his fireplace looked like, and she was not going to accept an account of him that she knew was wrong. I want to dwell on the crossbow for a moment, because I think it's one of the most under-examined details of this entire case, and it tells you something important about whoever did this. In Ireland in 2005, a crossbow was not a weapon you could pick up easily. Under Irish law, crossbows are classified as restricted firearms. They require a firearms licence, the same process as a rifle. You apply to your local Garda chief superintendent. You provide character references. You demonstrate secure storage. You show a legitimate reason for ownership. In the years between 2019 and 2021, far more recently than 2005, only 42 crossbow licences have been issued across the entire country. 42 in the whole of Ireland. That gives you some sense of how unusual this weapon was in the hands of a civilian in rural Donegal 20 years ago. A crossbow is not a weapon of impulse. You don't grab it in a moment of anger. It takes planning to acquire, planning to bring, and deliberate intent to use. And crucially, whoever fired it at Shaun Duffy that night brought it to his house with them. The family have always been clear that Shaun did not own one, and there's nothing in the public record to confirm that he did. It was brought there. Think about what that means. Someone planned this killing carefully enough to source a restricted firearm. They brought it to the house. They used it first, not to kill, but to disable. An 18-inch arrow through the right forearm of a 6'4" man. That's a calculated shot, designed to stop him fighting back long enough for what came next. 4 stab wounds, 9 blows to the head. Crossbow killings are exceptionally rare anywhere on these islands. When they do occur, they speak to a particular kind of planning and a particular kind of cold deliberation. Whoever killed Shaun Duffy didn't arrive angry. They arrived prepared. Shaun's father Liam, who passed away in November 2018, never saw anyone held to account for what had happened to his son. His mother, Kathleen, who testified at the inquest with quite dignity about the man her son was and the fears she carried for him, she has lived with the absence of justice for over 2 decades. His brothers carried his coffin into St. Patrick's Church on a February morning in 2005. They carry something else now. Gardaí have maintained every year that the case is active and it's a priority, saying a number of people have yet to come forward. That phrase, a number of people have yet to come forward, is one Gardaí have used at almost every single anniversary over a decade. It is carefully chosen. It does not say that nobody knows. It says that people who know have chosen so far not to speak. Whether that is out of fear, loyalty, self-interest or something else entirely, only those people know. 21 years, more than 1,500 inquiries, 600 statements, 400 lines of inquiry, a peer review, crime call appearances, anniversary appeals reported by RTE and all the national coverage year after year, and no arrest. Shaun Duffy was 36 years old when he died. He was, in his sister's words, a gentle giant. A man known from the horse fairs and racetracks and the funeral homes of West Donegal all the way to Dublin. A man who locked his doors because he knew, somewhere inside himself, that his life had edges to it that were dangerous. A man whose cousin stood at the altar of his own church and looked out at the congregation and said words that should never have needed to be said. That the people who took Shaun's life were out there, that every day was eating them up, and that the only way forward was to hand themselves in. He came home from his brother's birthday party in the small hours of a January morning. He drove 500 yards down the road. He walked through his own front door, and someone was waiting for him. If you have any information about the murder of Shaun Duffy, please contact Milford Garda Station on 074 915 3060. You can also contact the Garda confidential line on 1800 666 111. That line is available 24 hours a day, and you do not have to give your name. To Shaun's family, his mother Kathleen, his brothers and sisters, and everyone who loved him, I hope that one day someone finds the courage to tell the truth. Shaun Duffy deserves justice. His family deserves answers. Thank you for listening to Ireland Crimes and Mysteries.
So guys, that's it for today's episode of the Ireland Crimes and Mysteries podcast. Again, thanks for your listenership, and don't forget to subscribe to the show and hit that auto download so you never miss an episode. Until the next time, keep your eyes open and your mind curious. This podcast has been compiled from information gathered in the public sphere, like news articles, documentaries, and open source material that can be found on the web. Everything in this podcast is alleged unless a conviction has taken place.